I just got hit with a lawsuit by the most outrageous Karen you've ever heard of, all because I dared to live outside her HOA's boundaries. She insisted I follow the rules of her HOA, despite the fact that my home isn't even under her jurisdiction. Sounds completely bonkers, right? When she slapped that lawsuit in my face at the courthouse, it took me less than 3 minutes to not only obliterate her legal case but to unravel the entire fake kingdom she had built over the past decade. But this wasn't just your average HOA tyrant. Behind the scenes, Karen was guarding a shocking secret of $50,000 in cash that, once exposed, would leave the entire neighborhood in absolute disbelief. I'm Jake Robinson, 28 years old, a software engineer just trying to bring something positive to the community. Picture this. It's early Saturday morning, 6 a.m., I'm drenched in sweat, working on a swing set in a vacant lot right next to the Willow Creek HOA. This playground was a passion project I'd been developing for months. I'd secured approval from the city council, obtained funding from 3 separate non-profit organizations, everything completely legitimate and by the book. My goal was simple: give over 200 neighborhood kids a safe, free space to play. As I was focused on adjusting the swing chains, I heard the distinct sound of high heels clicking aggressively on pavement, fast and purposeful, like a predator stalking its target. That's when I met her, Karen Linda Patterson, 50 years old, hair in a razor-sharp blonde bob that looked like it could slice through steel. She strutted up in a blazing red power suit, clutching a rolled-up map like a sword. "Excuse me?" she screeched, her voice so shrill it might have sent birds flying from 3 blocks away. "Do you have any idea who I am?" I paused my work and looked up, trying to be respectful. She stood tall and smug. "I'm Linda Patterson, president of the Willow Creek HOA. Everything that happens around here needs my approval." You'd think she was declaring herself royalty. I calmly explained I was building a playground on public property. But before I could finish, she threw her hand up with theatrical flair. "You may not live under our HOA, but your actions are directly impacting the quality of life for our residents," she snapped, pointing at me like I was a criminal. "I don't care what permissions you think you've got, I'm going to sue you for interfering with my authority over this neighborhood." As she ranted, her face turned a deeper shade of red than her outfit. But what caught my attention more than her over-the-top behavior was the genuine fear in her eyes when she looked at the playground equipment. This wasn't just entitlement, she was truly afraid of something. But what could a swing set possibly threaten? Her harassment campaign began immediately and escalated at a wild pace. Every single morning, like clockwork at 7 a.m., Karen would perch on her balcony armed with binoculars, watching my every move like a suburban spy. In just 2 days, she'd called the police 4 times, each complaint different: suspicious activity, excessive noise, trespassing near HOA grounds. The officers who responded were clearly over it. They saw that I had all the right permits and was working on officially sanctioned public land. But that didn't stop her. She even paid a teenager $20 a day to wear a fake security shirt and guard what she called the HOA boundary, though that imaginary line seemed to shift based on her mood. One of her most absurd tactics was a dramatic social media campaign. She'd record over-the-top videos from her balcony, claiming I was ruining the peace of their elite community. She even started a petition demanding my removal. It got 3 signatures, hers and 2 painfully obvious fake accounts. Her live streams turned into hours-long rants about how I was lowering property values and inviting undesirable elements into their pristine neighborhood. But Karen wasn't satisfied with online drama. She upped the ante with in-person intimidation. She went on a spree plastering no trespassing stickers on anything she could reach: trees, mailboxes, fire hydrants, even the local stop sign. It was like she had appointed herself sheriff of the suburbs. Either she didn't know what public land was, or she chose to live in a fantasy where she ruled it. Things reached peak absurdity when she personally delivered what she claimed was an official HOA violation notice to my front door. The document was scrawled in purple ink on flowery personal stationery and stamped with what looked like a homemade star straight out of a kindergarten arts and crafts session. This laughable letter demanded I cease all unauthorized living and activities in what she called the HOA influence zone within 24 hours, as if she had invented her own legal system where simply being near an HOA meant you were subject to her rule. She had clearly spent hours crafting this nonsense numbered infractions, references to fake bylaws, all wrapped in her delusion of authority. Standing there, reading that ridiculous piece of paper, I couldn't help but laugh. But then something clicked. Why was she so obsessed with this land that didn't legally belong to her? Why was she panicking? Her extreme reaction wasn't just dramatic, it was hiding something. That night, I sat down and went over every interaction I'd had with Karen. There were strange patterns. She knew too much about the lot's activities. She seemed deeply afraid of losing control of that space. And she kept letting things sleep, like the fact that she'd spent years investing in the area. The most telling thing, she often referred to the lot as hers. She almost slipped and called it her land before quickly correcting herself to say it was just adjacent property. That one moment told me everything. Something much deeper was going on. This wasn't just a power-hungry neighbor throwing a tantrum over a playground. As I stared at that fake violation notice, it hit me Karen's obsessive behavior had nothing to do with HOA regulations. She was guarding something much darker, and what I would soon uncover buried in that vacant lot would expose a hidden criminal operation that made her petty power plays look like amateur hour. If you think Karen was already sitting on something big, you'd be right. Comment panic mode, because that's exactly what she spiraled into next. Over the following week, Karen escalated her harassment to a whole new level. She went full-blown nuclear, using every classic Karen tactic and inventing a few outrageous ones of her own. Each morning, she'd post dramatic safety alerts on neighborhood apps, so wild claims that unauthorized construction was putting children at risk. She attached pictures of my safe, legally approved playground gear but framed the shots in weird, ominous angles that made them look like some kind of dangerous industrial site. Her daily updates read like emergency bulletins from a disaster zone, warning everyone about a supposed hazardous facility being erected next door. Never mind that it was just a couple of swing sets. Her warnings convinced absolutely no one, but that didn't slow her down. She doubled down, updating her posts every few hours with increasingly frantic rants about falling property values and threats to the community standard. Then came the legal threats, or at least, what she called legal threats. Karen brought in a so-called legal consultant who turned out to be her buddy Bob, a guy who sells car insurance. Bob began sending me aggressive emails warning of lawsuits, damages, and other nonsense filled with fake legal terminology. They sounded like they were written by someone who once skimmed a courtroom drama and thought they were qualified to practice law. The subject lines alone were laughable. Final warning: cease unauthorized activity. Imminent legal action for community harm. They threw around phrases like property value diminishment and quality of life violations, which sounded official but meant absolutely nothing in real legal terms. Bob clearly had no idea what he was doing, but Karen was paying him to sound scary, so he hurled around legal-sounding jargon like confetti, hoping something would stick. It didn't. Karen even went so far as to laminate a 20-page booklet she titled HOA Rules, which she shoved into my mailbox on a daily basis. Never mind that I wasn't a resident of her HOA and that her rulebook had all the legal weight of a grocery list. And then came the $PA-assist-RA- copyright assistance. Karen took to patrolling the area with a megaphone, standing atop a lawn chair for extra authority. Dressed in her signature power suit, she'd shout out warnings about the unauthorized developer, aka me, claiming I was destroying the neighborhood's soul. It was so over the top that people from nearby homes started coming out just to witness the spectacle. There she was, barking proclamations like a suburban dictator, pointing dramatically at the swing set like it was a nuclear facility. Even the few neighbors who had backed her earlier began distancing themselves, clearly mortified by her increasingly theatrical behavior. But everything changed the moment I was digging out the foundation for the swing set and my shovel struck something solid about 2 feet below the surface. Curious, I unearthed a weathered metal box. What I found inside stopped me cold. Inside was $3,000 in cash and a stack of handwritten customer records that made my jaw drop. The list detailed monthly payments from local construction companies. Johnson Construction was listed at $300 a month. ABC Roofing, $250. There were about 15 other companies, all with similar amounts. At the bottom of the box was a cracked, laminated piece of signage that read, "Overnight parking $25 per night." Suddenly, everything clicked. Right at that moment, Walter Thompson, the retired carpenter who lived a few houses down, strolled over. Walter had always been quietly supportive via bringing water, offering building tips, but what he told me next completely rewired my understanding of what Karen had been up to. He scratched his beard and looked down at the cash box. "Son," he said, shaking his head, "you have no idea. That patch of land used to be packed every night. Karen was renting it out to trucks and construction crews. I'd see 15, sometimes 20 vehicles parked there overnight, each one paying $25 cash." Walter figured she was making around $3,000 to $4,000 every month, completely under the table. He'd always assumed it was some kind of city-run parking arrangement, but in hindsight, the whole thing had seemed sketchy. No permits, no signage, no oversight, just cash in, no questions asked. Suddenly, Karen's hysteria made sense. This wasn't about community pride or upholding some neighborhood ideal. This was about cold, hard cash, big money. Karen had been running a full-blown illegal parking business on city-owned land for who knows how long. Walter estimated that she'd been doing it for years, possibly making tens of thousands. And here I was, unknowingly tearing up her secret income stream with the public playground. All the talk about unauthorized activity and disrupting the peace, pure hypocrisy. Karen was the one breaking the law, raking in profits while pretending to be the protector of the neighborhood. That discovery set me off on a full scan of the lot. I spent the rest of the day digging deeper, and sure enough, I found another buried container, more cash, more scribbled records, and something else, an old, weather-damaged business card. Though faded, I could still make out the name, Linda's Parking Solutions. Below that was some barely legible contact info. It was all real. She'd been running a full-on business operation, complete with branding, client management, and cash flow on land she didn't own, on land that legally belonged to the city. As Walter and I sifted through the evidence, he started recalling more details. "You know," he said, his voice growing steadier, "a few years back, every evening this place would light up like a truck stop. By 6 p.m. most evenings, the place looked more like a contractor's depot than a quiet neighborhood lot." Karen would stroll out, clipboard in hand, collecting cash from truck drivers and equipment operators who needed a safe overnight spot to park. On busier nights, more than 20 vehicles lined up neatly in rows, and thanks to the location's proximity to major downtown construction zones, she charged top dollar. If she averaged just 15 vehicles per night at $25 each, Karen was quietly pulling in $2,000 to $3,000 per month, entirely off the books and completely tax-free. And nobody knew except her and the clients handing over the cash. The extent of her hustle was jaw-dropping. This was the same woman who had been relentlessly accusing me of unauthorized construction while she had been profiting off a full-blown illegal business operation on land that didn't even belong to her. It had nothing to do with preserving HOA values or community safety. Karen had been protecting her secret gold mine. Every accusation, every threat she had thrown at me now looked like a smokescreen meant to hide her real activities. But just when I thought I'd uncovered the biggest twist, what I discovered next proved that Karen's deception ran even deeper. Armed with the evidence I'd found, a cache, fake permits, and a customer list, I decided to get answers straight from the source, the city planning office. The next morning, I made my way there and met with Rebecca Torres, a city planning specialist. She was friendly, professional, and as soon as I explained the situation, she was just as floored as I was. Rebecca pulled up official records on her screen. Within minutes, every single one of Karen's claims fell apart. According to the city's maps, the land I was working on wasn't just outside of the Willow Creek HOA, it wasn't even adjacent. Over 150 feet of additional public space separated it from the nearest HOA boundary. "This is interesting," Rebecca said, studying the historical property files. "You're working on land designated as community development eligible public space. Projects like playgrounds are exactly what it's for." She made it crystal clear. Karen Patterson had absolutely no authority over that land. No one in her HOA did. Not only could they not stop my project, they had no legal standing to comment on it at all. Then came the aerial photos, a year's worth of snapshots that clearly documented how the lot had evolved. You could see the transformation from an empty lot to a makeshift commercial parking area with marked spaces, organized rows, and even temporary lighting for nighttime use. Not one bit of it had ever been approved. Rebecca confirmed it all. No permits, no applications, no oversight, just a rogue business hiding in plain sight, exploiting public land for private profit. Of course, word quickly got back to Karen that I'd gone to the planning office and she did not take it well. In true Karen fashion, she escalated. She sent out dramatic invitations titled Urgent, Our Community Under Attack, and hosted what she called an emergency home meeting in her garage. Only 4 people showed up, including her, but that didn't stop her from live streaming the whole performance like it was some kind of civic emergency. That night, Karen made a major blunder, one that would come back to haunt her. With all the flair of a drama queen, she waved around printouts of my construction and declared, "That land has been under my management for years. I've invested time and resources into maintaining it. I've made good money from it." Walter, my neighbor, was watching the live stream and immediately called me. "Did you hear that?" he asked, laughing. She basically admitted it right there. She quickly backtracked when someone asked what she meant, claiming she was referring to potential community benefits down the road, but the damage was done. She'd slipped up and publicly revealed what we now knew to be true: she'd been profiting off public land. Determined to gather more evidence, I borrowed a metal detector and spent the afternoon scanning every inch of the lot. That's when I made the biggest find yet: a large safe buried deeper in the ground. Inside was $8,000 in cash, a VIP customer list naming 15 construction companies with regular payments, and photocopied fake permits featuring Karen's signature beside a made-up title, Land Management Coordinator. That title doesn't exist in any city records. It was entirely fabricated. The scale of Karen's fraud was now undeniable. According to Walter, who had been watching this unfold from day one, her business wasn't just a side gig. Back then, he said, this lot was packed with trucks almost every night. Karen was charging $25 a pop. On good nights, I saw 20 or more vehicles. His rough estimate put her take at more than $3,000 per month, possibly more during busy seasons. That added up to over $36,000 a year. All cash, all unreported, all made off land she had no right to use. But perhaps the most damning evidence came in one final buried container: professional-looking business cards, rate sheets with different prices for various vehicles, and what looked like a contact directory with names, numbers, and payment records for dozens of contractors. Karen hadn't just stumbled into this. She built a whole commercial venture complete with branding and client management by privatizing public space for her personal gain, and all the while, she had the audacity to accuse me of unauthorized use. Karen had spent all of that time accusing others of unauthorized behavior when in reality, she had been running the single most unauthorized operation in the entire neighborhood. But the real bombshell was a folder I discovered containing a stash of forged permits and authorizations. Karen had crafted these fake documents to convince contractors that her parking operation was city approved. The materials looked surprisingly professional: fabricated city letterheads, phony signature stamps, and references to made-up ordinances, all designed to lend legitimacy to what was actually a highly illegal business. The permits were disturbingly elaborate. She'd printed counterfeit city seals, invented permit numbers, and even referenced municipal codes that didn't exist. Karen even gave herself a made-up title, a Land Management Coordinator, which sounded official enough to fool contractors who never thought to verify her claims. Her forged signature and fake stamp made the paperwork look convincing enough for anyone unfamiliar with actual city procedures. This wasn't just a quick cash grab. This was a carefully orchestrated fraud campaign. It had structure. It had marketing. It had documentation. Karen had built a full-scale criminal enterprise around the systematic deception of both the city and her customers. She hadn't only stolen the use of public land, she defrauded construction companies by making them believe they were paying legitimate parking fees. And suddenly, everything made sense. Her outrage over my little playground project wasn't about the park at all, it was about money. Lots of it. My simple community effort had accidentally threatened to expose what was likely her main income stream. Over the years, Karen had probably earned hundreds of thousands of dollars through this scam. Her entire lifestyle had been quietly funded by this illegal operation. So when my playground construction drew attention to the land, it wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous to her survival. The same woman who had tried to frame herself as a community-minded HOA president had, in truth, been operating like a white-collar criminal. And now, with undeniable proof of her phony presidency and her fraudulent business dealings, I finally felt ready to bring this to light. But Karen Patterson wasn't the type to back down quietly. Her next move would take everything to a new level, one that could either break me completely or hand me the final weapon I needed to end this battle for good. Comment fake president if you can't believe how deep Karen's lies really went. Once Karen realized that intimidation alone wasn't going to stop me, she made a desperate and reckless move. She hired a real attorney and filed an actual lawsuit against me. Her lawyer was Richard Sterling, a seasoned HOA litigation expert known for a ruthless win streak in property disputes. His retainer, $5,000 money I was almost certain came straight from that buried safe of unreported cash. Sterling wasn't some small-town legal hack. He had a reputation for being aggressive, polished, and extremely effective at steamrolling opposition in neighborhood legal battles. Karen clearly thought she had found her ace in the hole, but by escalating things to a courtroom, she'd made a critical miscalculation. Legal proceedings require actual evidence and not just angry rants and fake titles. The lawsuit she filed against me was a masterpiece of overblown accusations. She alleged that I had engaged in unapproved residential development near HOA boundaries, caused property value declines, violated noise and safety ordinances, and carried out commercial-scale construction without proper authorization. It was laughably if it hadn't been so serious. The way the charges were written, they made my small, self-funded playground sound like a hazardous industrial development site. Sterling had clearly drafted the language to be as intimidating and dramatic as possible without crossing into easily disprovable lies. But what neither of them realized was that I had a mountain of evidence on my side, evidence that would soon become their worst nightmare. Meanwhile, I was scrambling to find legal help. My budget was nearly non-existent. But then I caught a huge break. Enter Isabella Robinson, a sharp, fearless attorney who had recently launched her own practice focused on community advocacy and residents' rights. After hearing the details of my situation, especially the mix of HOA abuse and criminal fraud, she agreed to take my case pro bono in exchange for the opportunity to bring attention to shady HOA practices. Isabella was exactly the legal ally I needed. Smart, strategic, relentless, and completely unfazed by Karen's posturing. She immediately recognized that the lawsuit was likely a cover for something much larger than just HOA drama, and she was determined to expose it. For the next 2 weeks, we built our defense. We pulled every document we could from the city, interviewed neighbors including Walter about the parking lot scheme, and investigated the history of both Karen and the HOA she claimed to represent. And that's when we made a discovery that stunned even Isabella. Karen Patterson had not been legally elected as HOA president since her official term ended in December 2019. For over 5 years, she had been signing documents, issuing directives, and acting as a representative of the Willow Creek HOA with zero legal authority. She had essentially staged a quiet coup. No election, no vote, just an assumption of power she never relinquished. She wasn't just running an illegal business, she was running a fraudulent HOA presidency at the same time. But even with all that exposed, Karen didn't back off. In fact, she doubled down on her campaign of harassment and intimidation. In the weeks leading up to the trial, she went scorched earth. She hired a group of teenagers clearly to picket in front of my home. They carried signs that read things like "Protect HOA rights and stop community destruction," turning my once peaceful street into a bizarre protest zone. She plastered telephone poles across the neighborhood with flyers, wanted-style posters featuring my face, calling me a neighborhood destroyer, and even included my full name, address, and phone number. It was targeted doxing, plain and simple. But this wasn't just a flyer campaign, it was full-blown psychological warfare. She even put up conspiracy-style evidence boards around the neighborhood, connecting random photos of me to absurd accusations in red string and handwritten notes. Karen's crusade of chaos didn't stop at posters and picket lines. She escalated to full-blown conspiracy mode. She began plastering construction arrows around the neighborhood, pointing toward my playground site, surrounded by ominous claims about violations and handwritten warnings that I was part of an organized movement to destroy suburban communities. She even slapped QR codes on the posters as links to her unhinged social media rants, effectively turning a personal vendetta into an open invitation for harassment from anyone gullible or unstable enough to take her seriously. Then came the anonymous letters. They arrived daily, with phrases like "you'll regret crossing the wrong person" and "this neighborhood doesn't want you here." Each one was more unsettling than the last. It became obvious that Karen wasn't just trying to stop my project, she was trying to terrify me into giving up. Her online campaign turned into a whirlwind of delusion. She created fake accounts to attack me across every platform she could access. She posted doctored videos that made the playground build look like a demolition site, distributed my personal information across dozens of local community groups, and wrote angry letters to the local newspaper accusing me of being part of a vigilante construction cartel endangering property values throughout the region. Ironically, the absurdity of her posts began drawing attention, but not the kind she wanted. Her rants were so over the top that people began sharing them for entertainment. Karen unintentionally turned herself into a viral meme, a cautionary tale of HOA insanity in real time. But beneath all the theatrics, there was something else: desperation, real, escalating panic. This wasn't the usual Karen behavior fueled by entitlement. This was someone watching their entire world crumble and lashing out wildly to stop it. She knew what was coming. She even tried to flip the narrative legally, filing for a restraining order against me, claiming harassment. The judge dismissed it on the spot once he reviewed the actual evidence, which clearly showed that I had been the target. Then came her PA-DIR-assist-RA- copyright assistance, a 47-page evidence packet submitted to the court. It was a bizarre mix of irrelevant photos, red ink conspiracy notes, blurry surveillance shots of me working on the playground, and rambling character attacks. It read more like the notebook of a conspiracy theorist than anything resembling a legal argument. There were screenshots of city permit pages with arrows and scribbled questions like "why so vague?", photos of neighbors standing nearby as witnesses to the operation, and a handwritten timeline tracking everything from when I showed up each morning to how many people smiled as they passed the park. She was documenting community curiosity like it was evidence of criminal behavior. She even tried to get media coverage by branding herself as a heroic HOA president fighting unauthorized urbanism. But the reporters who showed up quickly realized there was no story, at least not the one she was pitching, and left unimpressed. Then came the final straw. The day before the trial, Karen showed up at the courthouse in her signature bright red power suit, towing two oversized rolling suitcases she claimed were packed with irrefutable evidence. She spent the entire day live-streaming her own pre-trial monologues, telling anyone who'd listen that justice will prevail tomorrow and that she was exposing a vast web of corruption and lies. Her performance was so erratic that courthouse security eventually asked her to leave, but not before she managed to corner several reporters and launch into unprompted rants about property rights, community safety, and criminal playground syndicates, sounding more like a doomsday cult leader than an HOA president. What she didn't realize was that every single one of these actions, every flyer, every post, every letter was being collected and documented by Isabella. What Karen thought was an intimidation campaign was actually building a legal record of her instability, her harassment, and her self-incrimination. And her desperation? It was making her reckless. She couldn't help referencing her years of investment in the land and her legitimate business interests that I was supposedly threatening, effectively confessing, out loud, to the illegal operation she'd spent years trying to conceal. She didn't even realize she was digging her own grave every time she opened her mouth. As I walked into the courthouse the next morning, I had no idea that Karen was about to make the most catastrophic mistake of her life, one that would not only end the trial in our favor, but leave her fraudulent empire in ruins. What happened in the next 3 minutes would be so shocking, so completely humiliating, that it would go viral and destroy everything she had built on lies, fear, and stolen money. Hit self-destruction if you think Karen's about to implode. The courtroom was packed. Over 60 people filled the Galleria residents, neighbors, reporters, and internet sleuths who had been following the case through Karen's own social media spectacle. It felt more like the premiere of a true crime documentary than a local civil trial. Judge Williams took the bench with quiet authority, clearly expecting a routine dispute over property lines and HOA rights. He had no idea he was about to witness one of the most memorable legal meltdowns in courthouse history. The atmosphere was electric. Everyone was waiting to see which side would prevail, the alleged playground anarchist or the overzealous HOA queen. Karen made her entrance like she was starring in a courtroom drama. Dressed again in that glaring red suit, she strutted in with her designer briefcase and carefully staged her position at the plaintiff's table like she was closing a corporate merger. She stacked her folders with a flair that said, "I'm the authority here," even though her entire case was a house of cards. "Your Honor," she began with exaggerated seriousness, "today marks the victory of law and order over chaos and destruction." Her attorney, Richard Sterling, gave a slight wince at her grandstanding, but to his credit, he stuck to his role. After all, he'd been paid well. He launched into a meticulously prepared argument, supported by a 25-slide presentation about the dangers of unauthorized development near residential zones. Each slide was more dramatic than the last, with titles like "Erosion of Property Values" and "Community Integrity at Risk." What happened next, though, would flip everything upside down. Sterling's presentation reached its climax with a community safety threat assessment and a timeline that portrayed my humble playground as an environmental catastrophe. He included speculative charts on plummeting property values, color-coded maps allegedly showing increased noise pollution, and even photos of other playgrounds presented as grim warnings of what would inevitably happen if mine were allowed to continue. According to him, children laughing and playing was apparently a precursor to total neighborhood collapse. Then came the fake HOA boundary maps. Sterling submitted manipulated diagrams that extended the association's jurisdiction by over 200 meters beyond its actual limits, making it seem like my project was encroaching on HOA-controlled land. It was a blatant distortion, but it looked just official enough to cause doubt. He brought in 3 HOA residents to testify. Their complaints about noise, safety, and property values were delivered with suspicious polish, like actors reading from a script. It didn't take a genius to realize Karen had prepped them thoroughly, and for about 20 tense minutes, it looked like her plan might actually work. Judge Williams appeared to be taking the presentation seriously. He nodded frequently, asked specific questions about HOA authority and property boundaries, and jotted down notes with increasing focus. My stomach tightened. I could feel the panic creeping in. Even Isabella, who had been steady throughout this whole ordeal, gave my arm a subtle squeeze, her own silent admission that the judge might be leaning Karen's way. Then, after Sterling's impassioned closing line about protecting established communities from rogue development, Judge Williams looked directly at our table. "The evidence appears quite compelling," he said gravely. "Does the defense have anything substantive to offer?" That's when Isabella Robinson roused, and in the span of just 3 minutes, she tore Karen's entire case to pieces with a kind of calm, calculated precision that left the entire courtroom stunned. "Your Honor," Isabella began, her voice steady and clear, "we have definitive evidence showing the true property boundaries involved." She activated her laptop, projecting an official city survey onto the courtroom's large display screen. The measurements were precise and indisputable. Then she pulled up Karen's falsified map beside it for a side-by-side comparison. "As you can see," Isabella continued, "the plaintiff's exhibit includes a fictitious 200-meter extension of HOA authority that simply does not exist. Mr. Robinson's project lies entirely on city-owned public land. Mrs. Patterson has absolutely no jurisdiction here." The room erupted in gasps. Karen sprang to her feet, her face flushed to match her signature red suit. "That map is wrong," she shouted. "Our HOA is bigger than that. I've been managing that land for years. It was a mistake." Judge Williams slammed his gavel and ordered her to sit down. But it was too late. In her panic, Karen had just admitted to something far more damaging than a boundary dispute. And Isabella wasn't done. "Furthermore, Your Honor," she continued without missing a beat, "We have substantial evidence that Mrs. Patterson has been operating an illegal commercial enterprise on this public land for over 5 years." The screen flickered to a new set of images, photos of buried safes containing $8,000 in cash, VIP customer lists from 15 different construction companies, and business cards for Linda's Parking Solutions. A hard proof this was no informal setup, but a full-fledged money-making operation. Then came the witness statement from Walter Thompson, a local resident who had observed Karen collecting $25 from each truck parked overnight. On some nights, she handled up to 20 vehicles, a tidy income of roughly $3,000 a month from land she didn't own. Karen lost it. "That's my money," she shrieked, leaping to her feet again despite the judge's warning. "I worked for years to build that business. I earned every penny." The entire courtroom fell silent as her confession echoed off the walls. Sterling, her attorney, looked like he was trying to shrink into his suit. He gestured frantically for her to sit down, but she was in full meltdown mode. "This guy destroyed everything I built," she cried, gesturing wildly at me. "I had customers. I had contracts. I had a legitimate business." Karen had no idea that she had just publicly confessed to criminal activity in front of a courtroom packed with witnesses and a judge who was growing increasingly alarmed. But Isabella had one more card to play, and most critically, "Your Honor," she said, clicking to her final slide, "Mrs. Patterson holds no legal authority as HOA president." The screen now showed the HOA's own election records. Her term expired in December 2019. No new elections have been held since. She has been acting under fraudulent authority for over 5 years, signing documents and enforcing policies without any legal right to do so. It was the finishing blow. The HOA bylaws were clear. Terms lasted 2 years with mandatory re-election. Karen had simply skipped the rules, declaring herself president for life and using that fake title to exert control, intimidate residents, and profit illegally. Judge Williams looked absolutely stunned. His face tightened into a mask of judicial fury. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice as cold as Arctic ice, "are you telling this court that you've been running a commercial business on public property while falsely claiming to be an elected HOA president?" Karen's final words sealed her fate. "There's no law against what I did," she screamed. "I am the president. I've always been the president. Everything I did was legal." Sterling stood up, grabbed his briefcase, and without another word, walked straight out of the courtroom. "Your Honor," he called out as he exited, "I withdraw from this case immediately." And just like that, Karen Patterson was left standing alone at the plaintiff's table, ranting, red-faced, and rapidly unraveling as the full weight of her deception crashed down around her. Judge Williams didn't even need to deliberate. The evidence via and Karen's own mouth had already done the work. Karen had convicted herself with her own words. After reviewing the evidence and hearing the plaintiff's unfiltered admissions, Judge Williams delivered his verdict. This court finds that Mrs. Patterson's lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice due to a complete lack of legal foundation. Mr. Robinson is authorized to continue his community playground project without further interference, and Mrs. Patterson will be subject to investigation for unauthorized commercial activity on public land and false claims of HOA authority. As security escorted Karen from the courtroom, still shouting about stolen businesses and fake mobs, I allowed myself to believe it was finally over. But I had no idea that her public meltdown was just the start. What came next would have consequences neither of us could have imagined. A massive, far-reaching, and life-changing. That 3-minute courtroom smackdown was merely the spark. Smash Karen meltdown. If you were living for the drama, you weren't alone. A month after the trial that dismantled Karen Patterson's empire of lies, the fallout was still rippling across the community like aftershocks from an earthquake. The legal consequences came quickly, and they were brutal. Karen was fined $15,000 for operating an illegal commercial business on public land, plus an additional $5,000 to compensate me for legal fees and delays caused by her baseless lawsuit. She was permanently barred from holding any HOA leadership position in the state, and the IRS opened an investigation into possible tax evasion related to the thousands in unreported income from her parking scheme. Karen had spent years hiding behind fake authority, but the law doesn't care about how official you think you are. And then came the internet, her courtroom tantrum, complete with her screeching "I am the president," while basically confessing to fraud, went viral almost overnight. The video hit 10 million views in the first week. Remixes, reaction videos, meme compilations, so you name it, they made it. Karen Patterson had become the poster child for what happens when arrogance meets accountability. The hashtag #KarenDown trended globally for 3 days. Fake President Karen became a meme that followed her from every job application to every local Facebook group she dared to comment in. Comedy shows mocked her. Legal podcasts dissected her trial. She was a cautionary tale for an entire generation. Meanwhile, my little playground project, it turned into something bigger than I ever expected. The grand opening drew over 200 families from across the city. Local papers ran stories with headlines like "Community Hero Builds Dream Playground" and "Local Man Defeats HOA Tyranny." 3 local businesses were so inspired they donated a combined $25,000 to help expand the park. The playground became the most popular family destination in the area. But my favorite part? Watching kids who once had nowhere safe to play now climbing, swinging, sliding, and laughing in a space built just for them is something I had once only dreamed about on a quiet Saturday with a hammer in my hand. And that wasn't the end of the journey either. The publicity from Karen's dramatic collapse unexpectedly launched me into a new career, community advocacy. I started helping other people fight back against abusive HOAs and property rights violations. My YouTube channel, Fighting Karens Legally, blew up, have 500,000 subscribers and growing fast. People were fascinated by how a mix of paperwork, patience, and persistence had defeated intimidation and corruption. I was invited to speak at 6 advocacy conferences. One of my articles on property rights went viral with over 2 million views. I consulted on 12 active cases in other states involving fake HOA presidents and overreaching neighborhood boards. Turns out, Karen wasn't alone, but thanks to her, I'd become something I never expected to be, an expert in stopping them. One of the most satisfying outcomes? Watching Willow Creek HOA finally transform. After 6 years of silence and shady dealings, the first fair election in nearly a decade was held. Voter turnout hit 95% and the highest in the neighborhood's history. And the new president, Walter Thompson, the same man who had bravely testified against Karen in court, he got to work immediately, passing bylaws requiring full financial transparency, routine audits, and community input on all major decisions. Willow Creek was no longer Karen's kingdom, it was a neighborhood again. Want me to continue with the final wrap-up or help shape it into a full NAR to prevent another Karen Patterson from ever hijacking the HOA for personal gain? The new leadership implemented strict safeguards. 15 families from the neighborhood personally approached me with heartfelt apologies for believing her lies, for staying silent, for not speaking up sooner. And in one of the most touching moments of this whole journey, the community came together to organize an appreciation day at the playground, celebrating not just my effort, but our shared freedom from fraudulent leadership. Karen's personal downfall was total. The empire she had built on lies and stolen money crumbled faster than even her loudest critics imagined. She was pressured to sell her house and leave Willow Creek entirely, the social ostracism following her viral courtroom meltdown making it impossible to stay. Her part-time insurance job vanished when her employer saw the videos. She was ordered to attend anger management classes, which, according to reports from fellow attendees, didn't seem to be helping much. Her social media accounts, all permanently banned for harassment and misinformation, cutting off her favorite stage for dramatic attention-seeking. Then came the final blow. The IRS concluded its investigation and found she owed over $40,000 in back taxes on her unreported parking income. She was forced to liquidate her remaining assets to avoid criminal charges. And yet, one last encounter would say more than any headline ever could. One Sunday afternoon, I was doing some light maintenance on the playground when I noticed someone across the street, half hidden behind a tree. She was watching quietly as the kids ran laughing through the swings and slides. It was Karen. She looked worn down, in faded clothes far removed from the signature red power suits she used to parade around in. In her hands, a newspaper with the headline, "Local Heroes Playground Draws Families from Across City." She stood there silently for 10 minutes, just watching the joy she tried so hard to destroy. Then, without a word, She turned and walked away. I didn't call out, didn't taunt her. I didn't need to. Because honestly, that moment spoke for itself. Karen Patterson had built her identity on fake authority and selfish profit. Now, she was just another cautionary tale, a reminder that eventually, lies catch up with you. And the playground she'd fought to kill, it thrived. More than I ever imagined. It had become a place of joy, connection, and renewal for hundreds of families, a proof that when people come together, they can build something real and lasting, no matter who tries to stand in their way. In an ironic twist, the woman who once screamed about protecting property values had inadvertently helped create a space that actually boosted property values and, far more importantly, quality of life. But just when I thought this chapter was closed, a message popped up that hinted my journey was far from over. Hi Jake. I'm Sarah from the Sunset Hills neighborhood. We've got a super Karen over here terrorizing the whole community with fake city ordinances and made-up authority. She sued 6 families over lawn decorations and claims she can inspect our homes for code violations. We're desperate and willing to pay consultation fees. Can you help us fight back? I looked around at the children laughing and climbing through the playground that had started it all, then typed my reply. Send me everything you've got. Time to take down Super Karen number 2. As I hit send, I thought back to everything this roller coaster had taught me about resilience, about fighting bullies, about choosing to stand your ground when it would be easier to walk away. Karen had bet everything on fear, fraud, and control. She never imagined someone like me armed with truth, documentation, and an iron will could bring her whole house of cards down. But she was wrong, because when a bully's entire world is built on lies, you don't need to shout. You just have to stand still, hold your ground, and let their own arrogance do the work. And in the end, the most powerful revenge isn't rage or retribution, it's building something beautiful in the ruins they left behind. So, that's the story of how 3 minutes of truth took down a fake president and her criminal empire. The lesson: never let bullies win. Document everything, know your rights, and fight back illegally. Karen thought her pretend title made her untouchable, but in the real world, justice always catches up. If this story helped you or made you smile, hit that like button, and if you want to support more real stories of community justice, there's a little donate button that keeps these videos going. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next HOA where we take on Super Karen number 2. The end. Or is it? This is your stories, and there's always another plot twist just one click away.